Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is February 1st, which is St. Bridget's Day, and here, at least in the Western world. And I'm really excited to be here. We have a whole bunch of beautiful people on this call. I am the director of the Feast for the Soul, which is a 40-day spiritual practice period that starts every January 15th. And it goes till February 23rd. We really welcome all kinds of spiritual traditions and contemplative practices as part of the 40-day deepening of your spiritual practice. And as some of you know, you're receiving email newsletters from me on a daily basis. If you care to do that, you can sign up for that. And some of you are just on your own journey and deepening your practice because you know the world needs it, and it doesn't matter what day it is. And I'm excited to be here. I'm talking to you from Santa Barbara, California, where I just moved here and have a new meditation center. As some of you may have noticed, our original home was in Sedona, Arizona. I am so happy that we get to welcome James O'Day. He actually reached out to us, which was such a pleasant surprise. James is the author of The Conscious Activist, which is what I'm really, really excited to hear more about too, and actively creating peace with his work. And I'm going to let him introduce his new prayer. But also I want to share, because one of our newsletters just went out about Edgar Mitchell and how when he was in the spacecraft going to the moon, I think he was the sixth person to walk the moon, he came back and was looking at this beautiful planet, and he had an awakening experience and recognized that everything is conscious. Everything is consciousness, and it's living through you as you, living through me as me, living through the world as the world. As some of you know, I'm in the US, some of you I know are not, but we're going through quite a lot here. And as a global community, with our current virus situation going on, and of course the political strife and the challenges, whether it's through Brexit or through our president here in the United States, we have a lot going on, and some of us feel a little helpless and hopeless. And hopefully today we'll hear how James O'Day can share with us his vision of activism and how our spiritual practice can literally change the world. So I'm going to unmute you, James, and hopefully you can hear me, and you can take it away and tell us about your activism, if you don't mind.
Well, I call it conscious activism. You can also call it spiritual activism, visionary activism. And it comes through my own process in the world, working for many years with Amnesty International on human rights issues, and the Seva Foundation, which dear Ram Dass, who passed recently, founded. Seva being the Sanskrit word for service, and then being president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, looking at consciousness and its capacities. So one of the things about the conscious activist is that resonance between the inner and the outer, transforming the self as a vehicle to transforming the world, feeling the evolutionary pulse within us and the call to spiritual engagement, but understanding the spiritual dimension as always transcendent and immanent, calling us out to the absolute, pure perfection of the absolute reality, and calling us back to inhabit that space. And so in my own journey after Amnesty, I really began to look at what we call societal or social healing. How is it that people can get so wounded that they torture, they do abusive things. Where does the wound come from? So rather than just saying prosecute, punish, get the wrongdoers out of the way, for many years with a colleague, Judith Thompson, we brought together Catholics and Protestants from Northern Ireland, Hutu and Tutsi, former Nazis and Holocaust survivors, in looking at that healing dissolution of the wound. And what we discover is that that wound is transmitted so deeply from generation to generation. It's almost sort of handed on as a precious artifact. And how do we become conscious of where the societal wound expresses itself in us, whether it's our righteousness, our rage, some of the things we think are great in terms of the activist, must be dealt with at a spiritual level.
Don't you, I feel like I'm an activist. I'm motivated in a very similar way that you are. I haven't been as successful as you are probably in terms of my activism, but I do find that the only way to transform the world is through transforming the heart. And yet on some level, you know, like reading a statistic yesterday that there are every 10 seconds an animal is abused. Now, I'm an animal rights advocate. I talk a lot about that. And, you know, that outrages me. I mean, I feel furious when I hear that, and I feel sad, and I have to be very self-compassionate because I can feel the desire to, well, this fury, and also to be kind to this little girl that, you know, was brought up in one of those environments that genetically passed on that type of rage. And you know, what do you think one should do with it? I mean, here it comes, and I know that Martin Luther King probably was not informed by rage, and maybe Gandhi wasn't informed by rage, and maybe Jane Goodall is not informed by rage, but here it comes. And I find that in my case, it moves me to action. Wouldn't it be nice to be an activist without rage? And I'm not sure how to go about that.
Right. Well, the first thing we should do is, in Gandhi's frame of reference, say, don't make anger wrong. Anger is real, it exists, but it should be treated like electricity and turned into light. And so, how do we turn our anger, our rage, our disappointment, our complete sense of being sickened by the political landscape, by the lack of progress on climate, as our Mother Earth is more and more wounded? When we see behaviors that are just outrageous and that those feelings rise, what do we do? Well, fundamentally, what the conscious, the spiritual activist does is say, I will protest, let's say, torture, since I spent so many years working on the issue of torture. But if I look at any specific torturer, I separate out the action from the being. So, yes, we can be rightfully angry at torture, and yet the torturer is a being, is a human being. So rather than direct our anger at beings themselves, we direct our energy at the activity. So we focus not on denigrating others, demeaning others. And it's very easy to do. We live in a mimetic environment. This word mimetic from meme, viral particles of meaning. We live in an environment where there is all kinds of condescension and righteousness, and that is not helpful. We need to focus indeed on the lack of progress on climate change, the lack of political diplomacy and dialogue. And this word dialogue, this is an activity that says, the word dialogue comes from the Greek dia logos. What an amazing word. Dia means through the logos, through the higher mind. So we come together in dialogue, always seeking dialogue, seeking the higher mind to guide us into understanding each other and listening to each other and feeling heard. If we don't feel heard, we turn our anger at others. So the technologies of nonviolent communication, of dialogue, these are spiritual activities fundamentally. They're conscious activist activities that can create the environment where solutions can occur, where people can be heard. But you start by separating out the action from the actor, and you never focus your anger at a person. You can focus your critique at what they have done. But because we are all beings, and what does it mean to be a being? It means to have a soul. Every being is ensouled, including, as you were talking about, our beloved relatives in the animal kingdom are ensouled. They are on the journey of soul evolution. And so you never attack another soul for its learning. And the practice we're going to be doing today is called the Soul Awakening Practice.
Wow. Thank you. Let me just thank you for sharing that and being so one-pointed. And I felt really like I got some sort of transmission there that I seriously needed. And I think everybody on this call probably felt that way because there is so much injustice, and being angry at the injustice, is only human because we're in love with, most of us, and with creation and the sentient beings that we share this planet with. So to remember that the anger should be focused on the act, not the actor. Thich Nhat Hanh says something very similar to it. I mean, there's so many, in Southeast Asia, so many pirates that kidnap people and throw them overboard after they take all their money. And he shared, at my surprise, the compassion towards these people who would have to live like this in order to feed their family, etc. And so yes, there's a lot of injustice. I know that what we put our attention on can change our personal experience in the world. On the other hand, putting our head in the sand can also change our personal experience in the world. I do want you to share, I'm sure your prayer came as a response to the suffering that you witnessed as part of the work you've been doing in the world. But can you just say for a moment before you introduce that practice, anything about being putting your where to put your attention? I mean, you signed up for helping people who have been persecuted and have been tortured based on where they lived or who they are, etc. So how did you bear witness to that and maintain your sanity and spiritually figure out where to put your attention?
Right. I think it is sometimes inflated in terms of, somebody is working on something huge and seemingly important, and another person says, well, I'm just working on my family. And I say, well, let's take just out of that, because wherever your field of attention is called, just think of a school teacher and the influence of a school teacher, a parent, any point of entry into this story. It begins to model peaceful behavior, empathic behavior, conflict resolution. I mean, where else does it begin but in the home, the school, the community, in terms of conflict? And we are learning that conflict is not wrong. Conflict is not a bad thing. Don't think that conflict avoidance is somehow the right approach. Conflict is natural in our universe, but it is how we face it and how we meet it and how we resolve it. I mean, Gandhi, talked about the absolute need for respect for your adversary. And he even talked about many of the British leaders as friends who he felt were misguided in certain ways, but he never ever denigrated them. And so he went into the heart of conflict. He gave his attention to it in a way that faced the issues. So that's part of learning how to be a conscious activist or a spiritual activist, is to hold the fire, is to stand in the fire. The mystic Sufi Ibn al-Arabi says, you pass through the fire to get to the garden of the soul. And I think that's enormously helpful to us. And in my own case, it began in London. As a teenager, I got a Teenager of the Year award for working on senior citizen issues and entering into some level of conflict with the government, I began to share with the media the plight of poor senior citizens in London who were supposed to be getting social welfare help, who didn't, in fact, weren't getting it. And when I exposed some of their stories and got this attention, the minister responsible wrote to me. Here I am, a 16-year-old teenager, and he said, you know, it seems as if you have some serious critique of our social welfare system, and I would be so happy if you would arrange to come and discuss this with me. And I let my anger get the better of me. Even in a miniature way, I wrote back and I said, you know what you have to do, and when you do it, we can meet. Listen to the arrogance, the righteousness in this, acceptable in a teenager, in an adolescent, but not as a modality of dialogue. If I had been a mature soul at that time, I would have said, what an opportunity to enter dialogue, to find higher ground. So I just want each one of us to honor where we are called, whether it's animal care, children's care, teachers' care, healing arts, nursing. What we are talking about, I wrote a book called Cultivating Peace. What we're visioning now is a whole new map of peace that is about the seeds of the culture of peace, even down to prenatal influences. So much of our culture of violence and aggression and materialism can be transformed. We look at the influence in social psychology, in positive psychology, in neuroscience, in consciousness studies, in nonviolent communication, and it goes on. The seeds of a culture that is peace from the inside out hasn't really been fully revealed. What has been growing in the soil of our evolutionary process. And though things seem particularly bleak, with political arrogance and nonsense and unskillful behavior, something is coming that is changing and will change our societies from the inside out.
Well, you make me very hopeful. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your 16-year-old journey. And I'm sure that informed you. I spent most of my time skipping school and in detention, so we led very different lives. I got the award not for Teenager of the Year, but for the most detentions. So there you go. Anyway, but if it had been this day and age, perhaps there would have been meditation taught, and then that would have turned my life around. It took me a little while to get that. Anyway, I'd love to just let you go on and share your response in terms of this practice that you've developed, this prayer you've developed that I feel can be a part of that transformation of this whole global consciousness.
Thank you. The prayer is contained in this little hand-carried, hardbound book, and it is in collaboration with the late Barbara Marx Hubbard. So the people who comment on each line of the prayer are Michael Singer, who wrote that wonderful book, The Untethered Soul and the Surrender Experiment. Barbara Marx Hubbard, Irvin Laszlo, the great visionary scientist of our time, Anodea Judith, Kabir Halminsky, the Sufi master, and Mona Polaka, one of the 13 indigenous grandmothers. And it's called Soul Awakening Practice. So let me just spend a little while before we do the practice and of taking you into it, if that's okay. And there are 6 lines, and the prayer is repeated 4 times, going from the individual to the collective. But the first line is soul awakening. And what is really, in essence, soul awakening? For me, and there are many perspectives on what soul is. Let's just take one perspective, that soul is the drop of the essence of the divine in each of us. So it comes down through evolutionary process. So the soul descends into the rocks, the crystals, the beginning of its identification with the material realm. And it then begins to grow in its journey through the plant kingdom, and then through the worms and the fish and the birds and the animals. And the soul identifies and learns a lot through this process until it comes into the human form, and then goes through many, many reincarnations, learning as a woman, learning as a man, learning as a rich person, learning as a poor person, until there comes a lifetime, which many of us are experiencing, when the soul awakens, when it feels that call of the divine in its life. And we could compare evolution, meaning out, evolution, turning out, and soul awakening as involution. So coming in to its back to its origins, becoming conscious of its divine essence. And that's when remarkable advances can be made in an individual life and shared in a community. And there is a great wave of soul awakening happening in our time as we begin to realize and remember our divine spark, and serving that spark in helping the world reform, transform, renew. I am fundamentally a believer in the birth of the new humanity. I believe this soul awakening will in fact continue at a deepening pace, creating what will almost appear to be a new species of human. Teilhard Chardin talked about this. Barbara Marx Hubbard talked about it. So many of our friends see and feel that the newly capacitated, conscious human being will spread, its consciousness will develop into new social norms and forms. So that's the first line, soul awakening. And then the second line is heart opening. And here, what we experience is the levels of the heart, that it is said that the Prophet Muhammad said, universes cannot contain me, speaking as the voice of God. Universes cannot contain me, but I am contained in the heart of my beloved. So the heart there is obviously huge. What we're really saying is, just as we begin to remember our divine spark, we remember that the heart is ultimate space. It is the universal heart. It is able to hold all being, all suffering, and all possibility. And that awakening of the heart, that opening of the deeper universal heart, is what we call forth. And then the third line is light shining. And that sense of the light, what we're talking about there is the light of consciousness itself, the light of consciousness which creates the material world. And I love Ervin Laszlo's little reflection on this in the book, because he connects up the science of that primordial light of consciousness with the light in our individual beings being something that is shared, unified vision of interconnectedness. That it's that light that holds us all, that loves us all, that treasures us all. Soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing. And again, just as we can begin to discover the capacities of our heart for universality, we can experience the unconditional love that is the source of all love. No matter how difficult and violated and oppressed we can find ourselves, that love can always be resurrected, always found. And in our earlier conversation about human rights and world oppression and devastation, I have had the privilege to meet people who have undergone the most incredible suffering, who yet are able to open love, former Nazis and Holocaust survivors, sharing that love flowing together, that love which is the substance, the engine, the fire of transformation. Soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving. And that is so essential, is it not? The wounds that get carried from generation to generation get dissolved by that universal heart and unconditional love. and that we end the transmission of wounds. I led a workshop a little while back, and the topic of sexual abuse came up, relating to many people having experienced some form of sexual molestation or abuse in their younger years. And yet, in every case, they represented the end of that story, making conscious reconciliation, forgiveness, ending the cycles and patterns of abuse, dissolving the wound with light and love and conscious activism. And finally, the final line, peace radiating, soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving, peace radiating. And what I have come to experience in my own peace work is that radiance of peace, the dynamism of peace. There is often a kind of mistaken passivity, that peace is something you do on a meditation cushion or by drumming out the noise. But the heart of peace is an invitation into the radiance of harmonious life on earth, the radiance of harmonious life on earth. That's the radiance we're called to. So there's one more word about the prayer. It's repeated 4 times. The first time is for yourself, is putting that awareness attention on your own soul awakening, your own heart opening, the light shining in you, etc. The second time, second round, is for the ones you're with. So today it is our soul as a group awakening, our heart as a group opening. How beautiful is that? And then the third is all of the connections that flow through us, all of our family, all of our friends, all of our colleagues, all of the connections, soul awakening, heart opening. And then finally, the final vision, the 4th time, is visualizing the planet, soul awakening on this planet, the whole heart of the earth people, heart opening, light shining in the consciousness of every being. So that's the prayer and that's the practice. And then I'll just hand it back to Sarah before we begin it.
Wow. Well, as you're talking, I feel like I'm again getting this beautiful direct transmission for exactly what I need, and I can only imagine what others that are on this call need. And so I so appreciate the work that you've done up until this point to pull together. I call them sutras, really, because each one of these lines you could talk on for an hour or two, or make it a practice for a year or two. And so even though it's so simple, it's so profound, so deep, and like planting a seed, it has so much information in it. And as we continue to put our attention on this information, I don't think it can help but manifest. And that's my hope and prayer, and that's the faith I have in it. So I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to practice it with you. And it reminds me again of the loving kindness prayer, or the Metta Bhavana. And I've made my own version of it, which includes let's practice with the people here, right here in this room, not some imagined folks, but each one of us that is personally struggling or personally succeeding in some way in our spiritual evolution. And, let's cheer ourselves on. Let's cheer ourselves on. So, would you like to lead us in to the next part of this?
I will. My phone will ring for a moment.
Okay, that's fine. And just for those who are listening to this chat or listening to this conversation, in the chat box, I put the lines, and I also put the 4 kind of directions that we pay attention to with these lines. If anyone would like to take that down, buy the book, I would say. So I think your phone has stopped. Who knows who's calling? Somebody very important, but I'm glad you're with us.
Thank you. So I will say the line, and then you repeat it aloud or quietly into your heart, and then we'll go through the practice.
This is an invitation for everyone listening to this. I'm going to mute myself so I can do it silently or aloud how I want. But thank you, James.
So remember, the first time is for yourself, for your own deep awakening. Soul awakening. Heart opening. Light shining. Love flowing. Wounds dissolving. Peace radiating. And now the second time for each one of us on this call, each one of us present here today for our awakening. To feel the connections of the power of this gathering, this soul feast gathering. Soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving, peace radiating. And now the third time for all of our families, for all of our friends, for all of our colleagues, for every connection in our life. Just feel this light and love and awakening reaching through us to all of our connections. Soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving, peace radiating. And now all of the beings on planet Earth really visualize this birth of this new humanity, this soul awakening of the collective field of the human, the birth of the new human. Soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving, peace radiating. Amen.
Hmm. Wow, what a beautiful, powerful, potent practice. Gives me a lot of hope, for
Yeah,
sure.
there are thousands of people who do this as a daily practice.
Wow. What is your daily practice?
It is that, of course, and it is also what I call the lineage of avatars, and I invoke different avatars as emissaries of the one light, Rama, Hari Rama, Hari Krishna, Lord Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and for me I add in Meher Baba, all streaming the one light. These are not many lights, these are not different lights. They are one light expressing different facets of the one truth. So it's a practice I do intensively to remind me to stay in the oneness, not to become fragmented in my thought of this over that.
Beautiful. Let me ask if anyone that just tried the prayer, enjoyed the prayer, experienced the prayer, has any questions. You can put it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself. Would you be willing to take a few questions, James?
They don't have to be questions, they can be beautiful commentaries.
Great. Would anyone like to share? Along the bottom of your screen, for those of you who are not on the phone, there is a little menu you can choose to unmute yourself. While people are figuring that out, if they are, I have a question for you because I love that practice, and I can see myself doing it as part of a sutra practice, as part of the Transcendental Meditation group, as well as Deepak Chopra's Primordial Sound, these mantra meditations. At the very end of the practice, we do something similar where you take almost like you're putting a pebble into a still pond and letting the content radiate out. And excuse me, I can see this being used with the silent practice afterwards.
Beautiful.
And another question I have, is can you imagine some avatars that are female? As I lived in a Zen Buddhist monastery and we chanted the names of all the teachers that had come before us, it was obvious to me there were no females that were recorded in history, even though I know every single one of those men had mothers. Do you have any sense of women? I mean, I personally know a few in terms of the historical perspective and archetypes and saints. What comes to your mind or heart about the women or the female avatars that you might invoke?
One is this extraordinary being called Hazrat Babajan. I believe she was an Azerbaijani princess, something in that area. from Samarkand or Yerevan, and she was, as a princess, going to be married off to some noble, and she ran away and gave herself to God, became a great ascended master. She was the person who initiated Mayor Baba. He got off his bicycle. She was living under a canopy on the side of the road, and he got off his bicycle, and she simply kissed him on the forehead, and he began to see universes open up inside of his own being just from that touch on his forehead by Hazrat Babajan. Great
Wow.
mystic Babajan.
Aham Brahmasmi, right? I am the universes. Beautiful.
Do you need to instruct people in how to mute?
How to unmute. You know, there are many people on phones, and I think they got the instruction when they were into the phone call. I can unmute everyone right now, and you can mute yourself. So if you have questions or comments, there's someone there. Anyone have any experience they'd like to share or comments for James?
Hi, Sarah, James. It's Carol Grace.
Hi, Carol.
I loved that meditation. It was so nice, and it just gave me chills. It was perfect, and I appreciate you sharing it with us and your time, and I really enjoyed it, and I will be using that quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Carol, I know, is a meditation teacher. We have a number of teachers on this phone call that have been out in the world being what I call part of the peace team. And are you comfortable with us practicing this and ultimately teaching it to whomever is our
Absolutely.
students? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. That's even better.
I see Robin Gurung is on the list. He is an extraordinary young man who also teaches meditation, works with youth at risk, is a model of a young conscious activist. Are you there, Robin?
I am not. That was directed at me.
No.
Robin.
No, there's a Robin here, I see. That
Hi,
is,
James and Sarah. I'm here.
hi, good to hear you. I see the big R on your screen.
Yeah. Thank you for the meditation, James. Every time I do it, it's very empowering, very powerful.
What inspires your own conscious activism?
Did you say
Robin.
something? I didn't hear it clearly.
He asked, what inspires your own conscious activism?
Oh, wow. Wow.
I think that's a question every single one of us needs to ask ourselves. And when
Yeah,
that
that's
question
a
was
very deep question. Wow. I think what I think of right now is my own self-healing process, I guess. Yeah, and yeah, I think right now it's the self-healing process that I had to go through, and at some point, kind of getting caught up in the cycle of revenge, and kind of realizing that it's not taking me to a new story. So in that process, like trying to find like what is really needed to create the new story and getting out of that cycle of revenge, cycle of violence. I think that the moment when I realized that, I think that's when I kind of like started working on my own traumas, on my own wounds. And yeah, I think that's the answer I think of right now, James. But I will definitely think about that. It's a very deep question.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for all you do and be.
You're welcome, James. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to share? I see so many familiar names on here. Sylvie, would you like to share a little bit? Sylvie's one of our teachers too in Los Angeles. Would you like to say hello and share your experience? It's good to see you on here.
Oh, thank you. I thought the prayer was beautiful. I came in a little bit late because I thought it was later. I got mixed up with the time, but I felt it was very peaceful, calming, something that would be great to share with others. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sylvie. I see Willie and Sheila are on the call. Would you like to say hello? Also teachers.
Hi, Sarah. How are
Hi.
you?
I'm good. I'm heading over there soon.
How are you? Oh, really?
Lunch. Yeah.
Good, good. Hopefully we'll see you then.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask James, because I'm from sort of Northern Ireland, I wanted to ask James, he mentioned very early on in his talk that he did work in Northern Ireland, sort of with the Catholic and Protestant people. And I would really be interested to know what it was he learned from there.
Yes, thank you. Again, I learned so much about human capacity to move on when they have been through so much. In one case, a woman we worked with in a place called The Junction in Londonderry.
Okay.
Her husband, in his first day at work as a police officer, had his arm blown off by a bomb. She was late in her pregnancy with her first child. And that trauma in some ways triggered a crisis in her life. Was she going to live in hatred and fear? Or was she going to try to change the story? I met another woman in Northern Ireland who was shot on her way to work, and they took her to the hospital. She lost pints and pints of blood. When she finally came through, the doctor said, "There is a bullet lodged next to your heart. We can't operate, or we would kill you trying to remove the bullet." And he was speaking in a way that preparing her for death. Then a few weeks later, he came back to her and he said, "Well, you obviously haven't died. You're going to have to get on with your life." And she said, "With a bullet next to my heart, I'm supposed to get on with my life?" And she went through a period of anger, but she too came through and started working on reconciliation. The woman with the bullet next to her heart does reconciliation work. And I sometimes think, I often think of, and I think maybe this is the time when in nature and all of the crises that have hit us on time, that the bullet has gone to our heart, but we have got to continue. We've got to heal. We've got to restore. We've got to forgive. We can't let that wound grow bigger. But just like that woman in Northern Ireland, okay, I've got a bullet next to my heart. I can live as the wounded person. I can transform the story.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates an awful lot with me because, as the rest of the teachers will know, when I went through my training with Sarah, my father was killed in Northern Ireland as well, just by, it was an unfortunate accident with a soldier, and it was the strength of my mother that got us through that, and she had the foresight. Now, when I look back, I see her as a visionary. You know, she sort of said to us as children that it wasn't, the person did not set out to do that. It just happened. And to be careful for us not to let it not ruin our lives, but make an imprint on our lives, so that's how, you know, we would walk through life. And so the five of us, my brothers and sisters, we made a conscious effort after my mum guided us. We made a conscious effort to try to understand why those things happened to us and not let it imprint on us. But I just was very interested to know what other stories were out there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you touch upon a very important issue, that when we think about forgiveness and reconciliation, we think about, do I really want to live with the toxin of enmity and hatred and woundedness in my life? So the releasing of that toxin allows us to find health and healing in ourselves and to be models of that healing transformation for others.
Absolutely.
I worked with a man who came home and found his mother had been beaten to death with a baseball bat. And he was an academic who taught about forgiveness. And he talks about how he eventually released the toxic poison of anger and enmity from himself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What it sounds like to me, for what's true, I believe, is that it's everybody's personal journey to make that choice. I mean, no one can make it for us. We can't wish it into being. It's almost as if we have to have a resolve to overcome the victimhood in some way. I mean, obviously some of us are victims. Your father, this man's mother, a lot of us are victims and have had that experience of suffering and being abused, but also there becomes a moment when that does not serve us anymore. And it shows up, I know, whether it's under moments of duress or stress, that the victim shows up and it's not really necessary or helpful at that time. I mean, it just keeps coming along with us like the bullet in the heart. So making that conscious effort to be a victor or victorious rather than a victim in some way. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Wow. Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you, James. I'd love to listen to some more. Do you have any closing words you'd like to leave us with? I almost feel like doing that prayer again. What else would you like to tell us? I can say you should go to his website if you'd like to listen to that prayer, because it's on there and it's beautifully recited for you. So it's like you're here with him in the room with you. It's lovely. And I got a chance to do that today.
I will end with the prayer in French.
Beautiful.
And there are several thousand people who are doing the practice in French, and the book Soul Awakening Practice is popular there. So Soul Awakening, c'est l'âme, heart opening, le cœur ouvre, se ouvre, light shining, la lumière brille, love flowing, l'amour s'afflue, l'amour afflue. Wounds dissolving, les blessures se dissolvant, and peace radiating, la paix rayonne. I love the sound of that prayer in French. Many blessings to you all. It's been such a privilege to be with you. Thank you for
Thank you.
for the feast of the soul, for carrying that word.
Thank you, James. Thanks for your work in the world. We appreciate you so much.